This is Ask Joe number. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. 203 of these suckers. I'm going to stop when I get to 1,000,000. But until then, what's 1,000,000 weeks from now? Somebody in the chat, tell me what the date is for 1,000,000 weeks from today. That'll help me decide if I want to commit to that. Hey, I hope you're doing well. Really glad you're here. It was actually fun. If you remember how I tell you every week to come show up for the live chat because it's super fun? Well, this week was super fun, except so I was recording a vocal session. I was in the other room recording, having a gay old time, recording lead vocal, harmony vocal, double vocal, then like 8 tracks of background vocals, all within like a 20-minute period. Was feeling super awesome. Came back in here and the audio wasn't on for the stream people, so they were literally just watching my screen in silence, which makes them the best sports of all time. I promise to try harder to not let that happen next time, but I like this idea of some sort of session happening just before we do an episode of Ask Joe. So that's super fun. There is a calendar that you can subscribe to. I think it still works. Go to homestudiocorner.com/calendar and you can subscribe. And here's what'll happen. When it's time for an Ask Joe, your phone will go boop, boop, and it'll say something like this. It'll say, Ask Joe Live is happening right now, and here's the link of where to go. And it'll be in your local time zone, I think, and then you can never miss again. So do that. All right, so I want to talk about something briefly, and then I want to get into your questions because I like your questions more than I like hearing myself talk. Oh, a survey is in. According to several sources, it looks like we're right at about 19,231 years. RJ says it's 30.70. So yeah, general consensus, a little over 19,200 years if I go to episode 1,000,000. So, I have to think about that. I'll get back to you on that one. So today I want to talk about, this is something that's just been on my mind lately, and there's a song on my upcoming EP called, I think it's going to be called Rain. If you've been watching Gilder Cam, you may have seen one. It's kind of a swampy, bluegrassy sort of song. It's that one. But the chorus says simply this, and there will be, or there has been a songwriting corner about this. I record all of them and then I post them later, which I'm realizing more and more is stupid. So I may just try to get them all up next time I do this because I realize it's funny. Some of the songwriting sessions are done before we had the wood wall installed, so it looks like I went back in time, which I kind of did. Anyway, the lyric of that song, the chorus goes, how does it go? Wise men say, though never understood, what's hard will get you more than what's easy ever could. And that's just been on my mind lately for all sorts of different reasons, but this idea that I don't know if it's just a cultural thing, a generational thing, or what, but we tend to, and I'm speaking in very general terms, but a lot of people tend to want to avoid pain at all costs, right? They want to avoid any sort of displeasure, even if the other side of that pain is something great. I think about it in relationships. I think about it when it comes to taking risk career-wise or taking risks whatever other way. I think about it in regards to health, says the guy who just started working out this month, and I hate myself. I'm kidding, I don't. It's actually starting to grow on me just a tiny bit. And of course, it applies to music. We tend to not want to put in, a lot of people tend to not want to put in the work to make great music because if they make something that's not great, they want to throw in the towel. And they don't realize that you got to make a bunch of garbage to get to the good stuff most of the time. That's not to say you can't hit a home run early on and have something great, but generally speaking, when you first picked up a guitar, if you're a guitar player, you weren't just shredding like Van Halen on day 2, most likely. But if you know that you have to develop calluses. You have to go through the frustration of how come I can't change from a C to a G without making lots of weird sounds in between. There are all of those things that come into play, and nobody sits there and, well, maybe they do, but if a kid came up to you and said, I've been playing guitar for a week and I can't play like Joe Bonamassa, and you would say, right, because you've only been playing a week. But then I hear people who say, oh, Joe, this is my first mix I've ever done, and I can't believe it doesn't sound good. What am I missing? And I'm saying you're missing about 5 years of mixing. And I don't say that to be elitist or to look down from my high tower. It's just some things take work. And I think if you can get past the idea or embrace the idea that there's going to be some pain involved, there's going to be some failure involved, and just be okay with that, I think you'll find on the other side of that pain is something pretty stinking good. Boom. Great. I am out of coffee. I just drank the last sip just now, just before I start answering your questions, which means I'm probably going to have a coughing fit at some point, because I also forgot my allergy medicine, and it's springtime in Nashville, which means my nose is dying inside. All right, I want to jump in and answer your questions. If you asked it way earlier, there's a chance I won't scroll all the way up and get to it because there's a lot of people here on the chat today. I'm going to make this chat window larger. Hey, look, there it is. And, that's too big. So hopefully I can see a few more things, but keep doing your thing in the chat. Y'all are awesome. We're getting some differing opinions. Some people are saying it's almost 22,000 years until my millionth episode, but then the general consensus is about 19,230. So still not sure on an answer there. Maybe y'all can help me think about it. Come up with an answer. A good question. Okay, first let me go to Facebook. There were a couple of good questions there. Facebook.com/Joe Gilder Music, or just search my name. Don't you spell it with a U. There's no U in Gilder, everybody. There, I said it. Okay. Ben Holmes, who I think is actually here. I think I saw his name sprint across that chat room. Ben says, what's the right thing to do when you get someone to play parts on your track, guitar parts, for example, but what they send you is not what you were wanting? Should I have given better guidance in the beginning, or should I ask them to do it again? And then he says in all caps, not your guitar parts, obviously. If you've been paying attention, I played guitar on a couple of Ben's tracks a week or two ago, which he's about to release. Ben, I saw your email. I haven't listened yet, but so I'm assuming they're not mine. But even if they were, here's how I would want you to approach that. Whether you've hired me or someone else, there's a level of risk that comes with hiring another musician. Whether you're hiring and paying them or just asking them to play on your project, it doesn't really matter. It's the same outcome either way. There's a certain level of risk, and that risk is they may not play what you envisioned in your head. Now, if you get really good musicians and they don't play what you had in your head, my experience is that's almost always a good thing, because what was in your head was you're limited in what you can. If you're not a guitar player, for example, you can't really think of great guitar parts the same way a great guitar player could. So my experience, a lot of times, it's great. The problem is they may come up with a great part, but it may not be a good fit for the song. Communication is always really important, and if you're doing things remotely, there's just no way around that. Sometimes it's going to be disappointing. I wrote an article and talked about this last year when we were working on Frankie Barranco's EP. Went over to Tim Horsley's place to do drums, and I'm super glad we went over there. He gave us a hard time for driving all the way across town when he could just do it and send us files back and forth. But I wanted to be there because I was unsure of how the drums needed to be. I had ideas, but I needed to really flesh it out. And I'm so glad I was there, because we literally stood there and he played, an 8-bar section, and then we sat and talked about it. And it wasn't me being a micromanager. It was him saying, is that kind of what you're going for? And me saying, no, something. And then I would say maybe with more toms, or maybe less hi-hat, or maybe half time or double time or whatever. But because he was hearing the raw songs, I was hearing more of the finished product, but I didn't know what the drums were going to be like in that finished product. So we had to kind of work through that together. So all that to say, at the end of the day, if you had an agreement and they didn't give you what you wanted, you don't have to use their tracks, but it's a case by case basis, I think. For a lot of people, if what they did is great, it's just not your taste, that kind of comes with the territory. I think that's part of just going out on a limb and taking a risk and using someone you haven't used before. They may not just have the style that you want. And there's no shame in not using their tracks, maybe just saying, hey, these aren't exactly what I wanted. Thank you for your time. I'm going to go a different direction. And if they push back and say, well, what do you want? I'm happy to, maybe they'll say, well, I'll re-record them for free. Just tell me what you want. I just don't know. I think it's a hard situation. I think over-communication will be key to it. But I think it really depends on if you think he can give you what you want and you think you were clear and he didn't give you what you wanted on the first try, even though you were very clear. But if you weren't clear and you were just hoping for the best and then they came back with something you don't like, then that little bit of that's on you because you didn't make it clear and then you hired him to do his thing. He did his thing and you didn't like it. I'd say you still pay the guy and move on. You don't have to use them again, but that's just kind of the way I feel about it. Granted, I haven't run into that situation much, which I'm thankful for. Craig says, Joe, is de-essing before other processing your way to go now, or do you do it after? Or either, depending on the circumstance. I go back and forth. For a long time, I did the de-esser was the very first thing in the chain if I needed it, because the compressor always makes the sibilance worse. So I figured, why not chop that out before it gets there? But then it sometimes would be too much, and I couldn't find that balance. So when I put it first and it's not working for me, then I'll put it after the compressor. And sometimes having the compressor enhance the sibilance makes it easier to cut it out with the de-esser, which sounds backwards, but that's been the case sometimes. So that's probably the way I would take that. Bill Rexford in Facebook said, when recording guitars through your 11 rack, do you record a dry tone or do you dial in your sound with effects? Bill, I can't think of a time I've recorded a dry tone, like a raw, DI'd guitar. I understand there are situations where you would really be glad to have that if something went wrong, but I am of the persuasion that I like to get it right the first time. So yeah, I dial in the sounds that I want. I usually, probably 80% of the time, if I want delay, I'm recording it with delay as opposed to adding it later, unless I want like a stereo delay and I don't have a stereo delay pedal, that kind of thing. But no, I'm always recording it as I want it to sound so that I can literally have just a WAV file that sounds like I want. I'm not reliant on any plugin to recreate that. I'm not having to reamp. I feel like reamping is a big waste of time. I would much rather get it right the first time. Now, I understand if you're not sure you are capable of getting it right and you want to record a DI just to be safe, that's fine. But I like to not leave myself a way out. Something happens in your brain when you know you can't go back and fix it later. It makes you pay more attention now and not just kind of willy-nilly dial something in thinking, well, I can just reamp it later. That's lazy to me. I would rather get it right now and not have to redo it. Thomas Bjorndal, I'm getting close on that name, Thomas, I promise. I promise, Thomas. Do you have some tips on how to record an upright piano? Keep or remove the cover, mic placement, mic types, etc. So that's a good question. There are different types of upright pianos I've come to learn. There's the traditional upright where the hammers, if you take the cover off, the hammers are right here in your face. And then there's like a console piano, which is what I have up in the house. And it's one where the hammers are kind of, you can lift the lid and you can see the hammers sort of down in there, but there's not really an easy way to get to it. I would say take all the covers off, whatever covers that come off, and then really just experiment. I've had a lot of luck with putting mics down. So so where my feet are, there's usually a cover over the pedals that makes it look pretty. Take that off, make it look ugly. Then I found putting two mics down there spread out gives it a pretty cool sound. You get some sound from the sustain pedal, especially if it's squeaky. You have to deal with that. But that works really well. You could try just a set of room mics. If you just like the way it sounds in the room and the song and it fits the song, then you can do that. I have opened up the lid, so mine has a lid that just opens up. I've done that and stuck a mic in there with mixed results. For an affected piano sound, it's cool, but if I want a big full piano sound, I find I get more fullness down at the bottom part. Now, my buddy Ben Gortmaker has one of those uprights where the hammers are up here in your face, and he just puts two microphones right here facing it, and he gets a great sound. He sent me a recording the other day that I thought sounded incredible. So for me, it's piano. Every piano is different, and every approach is different. So I would just take what you know about recording, the basics of recording, like the polar pattern of your microphone. If you move it closer, you'll get more low end, but to the exclusion of notes around it, and just spend a day experimenting with it. And then once you have, now you've got a couple of go-to things to try, and then just go from there.
That's what I would do if I was you.
This is Matthew Kelly. What's been your through process approaching the recording side of your new acoustic album? Signal chain. What's been my signal chain? I have run, all my acoustic guitars have been a pair of, and remind me to say something about this in a second, a pair of Earthworks SR25 small diaphragm condensers in XY, and then I point those right at the sound hole, which sounds weird, but they're not actually, since they're an XY, they're actually neither one's pointing at the sound hole. They capture both sides of it, and it gives a really full sound, which is super cool. Been running those through my PreSonus ADL 600, which is a 2-channel tube preamp, and that's it. They have a little bit of a high-pass filter at like 80. And then vocals, I've been running the Mini K47 from Roswell Audio or Roswell Pro Audio, and that's running through the ADL 700. Same preamp. I'm not using compression or EQ on the way in. I'm just recording it in, and I'm standing fairly close to the microphone. And for percussion, I'm using this mic here. You can't quite see it. There it is, which is the Cascade Fathead, which is funny because I have a large cabeza as well. It's just a standard ribbon mic. It's not the modded one. And that, I think I run into the channel strip as well, the ADL 700. Sometimes boost the low end if I'm recording the djembe. Shakers, tambourines sound nice on that. Also, I've done them in the other room as well. If I'm just there and I have a shaker part, I just play it while I'm in front of a microphone. Don't really care too much about that stuff. What are your thoughts on pink noise mixing? This is a question from Ben. So Ben, I'll be honest, I started watching whatever that video that's going around that talks about pink noise mixing, and I just stopped because I just didn't, it was like a 30-minute video and I didn't have time to watch it. But for me, the way I understand it, and I could have it wrong, is this idea of using pink noise to, or like the spectral shape of pink noise and trying to match your mix to that, then it would be balanced. I'll be first to say I don't quite know what the technique is. And secondly, I haven't tried it. But in my opinion, if you're looking for an approach that takes the musicianship out of the equation and inserts math, it's probably not a super great approach. It may work, but it's like saying, hey, Joe, do you have a mathematical formula for writing your songs? No. Granted, I follow the general rule of, if I'm in the key of C, I'll probably play a C major chord and an F and a G and maybe an A minor and a D minor, and maybe I'll be crazy and throw an E major in there to throw things around. But I'm going to follow rules of music, but I'm not going in saying, okay, I need a 16-bar verse, and it needs to have these 4 chords in this order because that is mathematically correct. I don't do that, right? And of course, that's a ridiculous thing to even talk about, but it feels like that's where people are going with this pink noise mixing thing. They want to say, I have found a way I could literally just turn my speakers off and plug my ears with wax and could mix a song. Who wants to do that? I understand if you're frustrated, and people are saying it might be handy for people that don't have good speakers. I get it. I get if you're maybe trying to see if your low end is out of control. I understand. But for me, there's just no shortcut. There's no way to shortcut this process, just like with guitar. You could say, oh, could I get that thing where I can push one button and it holds down the notes for me? You could, but you're not going to become a great guitar player. And I don't think you'll become a great mixer by doing this approach. I could be completely wrong. Someone mark my words, and around episode 300,000, I'm not sure how many years ahead that is. It's maybe like, 5,000 years. You can tell me if I was wrong, okay? Nadim, who is a math teacher, says pink noise method isn't art, which if it's not art, I'm not super great on that. I'm not down with it. Okay, there was a question here. Simon, my boy, Simon Karlstead says, could you describe the main difference with mindsets regarding arranging the acoustic EP versus a full band one? To be honest, in a lot of ways, I think acoustic is harder because you just don't have as many instruments. You're still wanting to release something full and big, but obviously you can't lean on things like electric guitars and bass guitars and big drum kits to get you there. At the same time, it's really fun because when I do a full band project, if there's acoustic guitar, it's pretty thin, right? We EQ it to where it fits with everything else. because we have plenty of instruments handling the low end, so the acoustic guitar is relegated to a little bit thinner place in the mix. But if you're doing an acoustic project, suddenly that acoustic guitar can be big and huge because there's nothing else to compete with it. I'm not even recording bass for my EP, so the acoustic guitars can be as full as I want them to be, which is super fun. The problem is in keeping, for me, I'm trying not to keep it boring, and I'm also trying to get it full. So just in the last year or so, I've started doing with acoustic projects where I'm, instead of just having 2 guitars or 3 guitars, I may have, I mean, you may have seen on the Gilder Cam video where I had a session with 3 rhythm acoustic guitars and then 7 more guitars playing different rhythmic parts and melodic parts that all added up to this really interesting full sound. And it was just acoustic guitars and some shakers and a djembe, I think. So as far as the mindset, it's still the same. I still want to hear something that has lots of energy, that has dynamic, that, you know, gets big and gets quiet and does the things that I normally want a song to do. It's just the tools that I'm using are different, and I have to use them differently. That's probably a very obvious answer, but I don't have much else other than trying a lot of things and not being afraid to have a bunch of guitar tracks if you need to make it work, or different instruments. I wish I had a mandolin and a bouzouki and I wish I could play fiddle. That would help, but I don't, and that's okay. Hey Joe, I've seen you use a laptop for controlling your main rig when doing double duty. I saw a vid where you talked about using a foot pedal. What are the options? Which do you feel is best? I like the laptop option. Obviously, having a studio computer and a laptop is not a luxury everyone has. I get that. I don't want to flaunt like, oh, I've got 2 computers. But since I do have them, I use it because it's nice to be able to completely control Studio One from in there. So if for example, yesterday, I recorded a shaker part and some tambourine parts, and I quickly just edited them, did a quick quantize on them, set them up in the loops that I wanted, and put them all where I wanted them to be, and I was able to stay in there the whole time. Keep my headphones on, keep everything where it was, as opposed to bouncing back and forth. That's the biggest reason. If I'm in here, for example, if I'm doing a lot of percussion stuff, I'll do it in here. A, because the room sounds kind of nice for percussion, and B, it's easier for me to do a lot of that looping and quantizing stuff when I'm at the computer versus on a little laptop screen. The foot pedal thing you asked about had to do with this, which is the PreSonus fader port. It has a 1/4-inch jack on the back, so you can put something like a sustain pedal, any sort of momentary switch, I believe, where it'll essentially be like a record button. So I could be standing here playing guitar and then stomp on it, and it'll punch me in right where I stomp on it, and then I can stomp it again, and it'll take me out. It's kind of a punch in, punch out mechanism. That said, I actually am liking doing just a pre-roll recording where I'll find the spot that I want to record, I'll set the marker there or the cursor there, then I'll hit record and it'll give me 2 bars of pre-roll and then it'll punch me in. Most DAWs will actually record that entire 2 bars as well. So if you punched in a little late, you can drag it back and still capture the audio. I like doing that. It's very fast and easy. And if you were here at the beginning, you may have seen that on screen. That's what I was doing. I was going and finding spots where I messed up on the vocal, selecting right before that, hitting record, and then it would let me hear 2 bars, and then boom, it would automatically punch me in, and then I was done. When I was done, I would just hit stop. Good question. Some DAWs let you control via your phone. That's true. I don't use the Studio One remote app. I've never used it. I literally just am screen sharing from my laptop. Trying to go through. Simon, by the way, one last comment on acoustic albums. Go listen to Andy Gullahorn's, any of his albums. The Beyond the Frame is especially good. His stuff is all acoustic. It may have drums occasionally, but it's very light. And it'll have things like cello and lots of acoustic guitar. So I'm stealing a page out of the Gullahorn book to do a lot of the acoustic stuff that I'm doing. I feel like his albums give me permission to do lots of guitars, and it can work. And definitely listen to that. Part of it is just getting in that headspace. So listen to his album, and I think you'll get some ideas, or at least a general vibe of what's possible with just acoustic instruments. Can you compare the CPU performance between Studio One and Pro Tools? I can't. It's been so long. I didn't switch for performance reasons. but I rarely run into issues with Studio One. That said, I'm the guy who uses stock plugins, which tend to not be very. I just lost my train of thought. They tend not to be very processor intensive, so I'm probably not a good person to ask. It reminds me, you ever seen the Lego Movie? When he's on his phone, he's about to report Wildstyle for being in the construction area, and then he sees that she's a pretty girl. And I'll have to report you. That just happened to me, just in case you're wondering. Why did the djembe bother Nash? I don't know. He's not in here now. Yesterday, when I hit it, it vibrates the whole room. But something about that, he would come up to me and like lick my hand. Please stop, please stop, please stop. So I just recorded 1 or 2 hits and then looped them. So I made him happy. All right, I'm scrolling back up. Craig has another question. Says, not to hog the question arena. You a question arena hog. But I recently wanted to hire a backing vocalist, and her condition on her site gave her rights to own my publishing. Have you heard of this stipulation? No. I'm skeptical that she owns your publishing. What she may be referring to, and I would refer you to somebody like Sam Canuck or somebody who knows more about this type of stuff. I know that the vocalist can get some royalties based on if your song made it to film, for example. The musician, or especially the vocalist, I don't know if it's background vocalist, but I know the lead vocalist can get a royalty just for being the singer, in addition to the person who wrote the song, produced it, and all that. That is the most I know. Please don't ask a follow-up question because I do not know. Michael Moore says, do you ever have to deal with hum or noise when recording electric guitar? Yep. If it's like a for real ground loop, you got to deal with that. If it's just that the amp hums, I like it. I think it's cool to have some hum in there, but I'm tending to do more like straight up junka rock music versus something soft. If you're doing very clean stuff, it might be worth checking out different options for either better cables or better power supplies or something to handle any ground loop issues you may have. Also, I've tried to hook up 2 amps to a stereo effects box so I can have cool stereo amps. Unless you have the expensive equipment that makes that work, as soon as you plug in both, you'll have super crazy amounts of buzz. So I just stopped doing it. Could you? Already answered that one. Joe, why wouldn't you create parallel channels for the de-esser and the compressor and blend them together? Because I am a fan of Dr. Occam, who said the simplest solution is almost always the best. For me, I don't want the sibilants in there at all. So, for example, if I take your example and I split the vocal, I have one for compression, one for de-essing. Well, what's going to happen? The compressor is going to bring out the sibilants. The de-esser is going to take the sibilants out, but it's not going to affect the fact that the compressor brought all that sibilants in. So we literally have not solved the problem. We've done nothing. So it has to be in series, not in parallel, because the compressor is bringing out something that you're trying to take away with the de-esser. You can try it, but I don't think it'll work. Are there any popular artists or songs you love, but after starting to mix music, things get ruined for you? For me, 311 and Incubus recently with ringing snares. Yeah, Incubus, they love a good ringing snare. Whatever tomorrow. Does this phase pass? You know, I wrote about this just the other day. I was listening to an old Switchfoot record, and instead of just enjoying it, I started listening like a mixer, and it ruined it for me. Suddenly I was like, I don't like that drum sound. Those guitars aren't that great. That vocal tone's kind of lame. Like, it just totally tore it apart and I had to stop listening because it wasn't fun anymore. It depends on where you are in the process. I think if you can always bring yourself back to it's all about music and not about the technique, nobody cares what mic you put on the snare. They care if the song is great. And if you can stay in that place as much as you can while taking vacations into technical stuff to do good work, but then pulling yourself back out and actually thinking about globally what makes a good song and good music, I think you'll be in good shape. My buddy and I, nope, that wasn't a question. How do you choose the title to a song or an album? I'm a big fan of one-word titles. I don't know if that's good or not. It's probably lazy. Usually it's just a word that's in the song for the most part. Usually in the chorus or the first line of the song. Sometimes it's not. And then the album, I just pick my favorite song from my favorite one, or the one I think encapsulates the tone of the album or the EP, and that becomes the name of the album. I have no other deep thoughts than that. Joe, just wondering if you use any agreements when working with your clients. This is what makes me probably a bad person. Not a bad person, just a bad engineer. I don't really. Now, when I do when it's like people are hiring me just to mix. Those, when they place their order on like the order page, so they can do it online, it says you are getting a mix from Joe, and that includes up to 3 revisions. That's it. So just spell that out. It's pretty clear. And that's really the only thing. When people, when I do like client work with people in person, we just kind of just sit down and agree on stuff. And I tend to work with people who I know and trust too, which is helpful. If you're working with a lot of strangers, then yeah, it probably makes more sense to step out and have something in writing. But again, if they're going to try to screw you over, having something in writing isn't going to make that much of a difference because they know you're probably not going to take them to court over a $200 thing they didn't pay. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I tend to just go towards just make music and work with people, and everything will work itself out. Way earlier in the chat, Kenneth said Methuselah didn't even make it to 19,000 years, so I'm probably not going to either. Fine, I knew you'd throw old Methuselah into this. What all-time rock albums do you like as a mixing listener? For whatever reason, I keep coming back to Bringing Down the Horse by Wallflowers. I just love the organ sound in there. The guitars are great. That B3 is insane, and I like the drum sound. But I don't do a lot of referencing. At this point, I listen to something and I say, what do I want this to sound like? And then I do that. Is that weird? Probably. I don't know. I'm just not a big reference guy anymore. For mastering, I am, because it's the last phase of the process. But for mixing, I just try to get creative. And part of that is I've done enough mixing to where I know what a good mix sounds like. So I'm leaning more towards how can I hopefully, please, Lord, let this mix be good, and get to, I'm going to make this mix sound good, but how is it going to sound? Is it going to be like this or like this? And then I just make it a big creative endeavor for me. How long have you been singing, and how did you get started? Well, as soon as the doctor spanked me on the bottom, I screamed out, and that was my first song. I'm kidding. I've been singing, I guess my first solo was in like 4th grade. I sang It's Not That Easy Being Green, and I had a Kermit the Frog on my knee, and I was awful. No, my first solo was the theme song to Winnie the Pooh, where I literally sang the whole thing like this. Deep in 100 acre wood. The entire song. It was awesome. My mom made me go back and do it again, which was super one of those moments that affected me for a long time. Okay. But yeah, I started writing songs in like junior high. I was in a band in high school. Wanted to be a rock star, and then just kept singing from there. How did I get started? I just wrote. For me, it was I sang in the choir. I would sing whenever there was a chance to sing in like a musical or some sort of like talent show, and then the band. And then I found writing music and recording, and then I mostly sing for that now. And it's been that way for years and years and years. Dan Updegraff says, when charting a song, how to write down specific place on the guitar neck to play a chord, or do you just rely on your memory? So for general intents and purposes, charting a song isn't telling you exactly where to put your fingers. It's telling you what the chords of the song are. So if you want to play it up, you'd have to remember that or make a note in the margins or something like that. Yeah, but I tend to remember because I'm generally charting the song as I'm about to play it. I may forget 2 years from now, but I can always go listen to the recording and hear it and say, oh, okay, I'm playing that A way up here instead of way down there. Great songs, great questions today, by the way. How do you choose what order songs go on an album? Do you follow any rules or ideas? You know, it's different with every album, but generally speaking, I don't want to. I like the idea of going from one key to the next. So of listening to songs and their key, and then trying to, if there are 3 songs in the key of E, it'd be nice to have those go together. So it just transitions really nicely from one to the next. I've heard before, general rule of thumb, if you're going to change keys from one song to the next, go up instead of down. I don't know if that works, but I tend to think about that as well. But more than that, I'm trying to think of the kind of the story of the album and where the songs need to go to tell that story well. If there is no story and it's just random songs, then I just put, my favorite couple up front, and then maybe get a few more chill songs, then maybe something kind of exciting on the back end. Are you and Graham planning on doing another of your weekend intensive sessions? Currently, we're not. I may put something together just on my end, but I think Graham's got a lot going on. We talked about it. I don't think he's down for it, at least this year. When will we hear a complete version of What I Know Now? I love the following development of that song. I don't know, Lewis. It just fizzled. The first version was AC/DC. The second version was weird, and then I just lost interest. It didn't make it on the EP. I didn't love the song anyway, so probably never would be my answer. Keith says a Graham and Joe collaboration on an EP would be better. That's true. We have yet to make music together, which is just sad. It's one of those things. We're both guitarists and vocalists, so it's one of those. Well, then who's gonna sing? We just never talked about it. I think we're secretly competing with each other. Sam, you said your buddy Mark played guitar on. You talking about the Wallflowers album? That's insane. Okay, my voice is starting to do that scratchy thing where I can't talk anymore. So I think I got most of the questions. So I'm going to wrap this thing up. If there are any last minute questions just burning a hole in your soul, let me know and I will answer them. But it's time to start wrapping this thing up. I got things to do. What are your thoughts on mixing 2 tracks with vocals? Well, I mean, I get that question a lot, especially from people who are doing, like, a lot of rappers and hip-hop artists. They're just getting a stereo track of the beat and they want to mix vocals on top of it. To me, it's really easy because you have to realize there's only so much you can do. So you just mix the vocal to sound good with the music. That's it. You can't turn the bass up. You can't turn the kick down. You just got to make it work. Which to me, oddly enough, I like situations like that because it makes I don't have to worry about fixing things I can't fix. That's one of the beauties of getting to a point where you realize that you can only do so much in mixing. So if you get tracks that sound like garbage, when I get tracks from clients that sound like garbage, a little part of me is happy because I know, A, they probably won't be able to tell if a good mix from a bad mix because this is what they thought were good sounding tracks. I know that sounds awful, but I can just do my best on it, but I don't have to spend tons of time trying to make it amazing because it was never amazing to begin with. That's a pretty liberating experience. That's a good one to end on. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.